right, so chapter 1 is a really nice preview of some of the main topics that we're going to be covering throughout the rest of the semester. Now, as we begin our discussion of biology, we have to understand what biology actually is. So biology, by definition, is a scientific study of life. Bio standing for life, and then ology is the study of. Now, this is a really, really broad field, and biologists, there are thousands of us all around the globe, and we ask a lot of different kinds of questions. So, for example, a biologist could ask the question, how does a single cell develop into an organism? This potential question is asked in particularly the field of development, right? We don't even have all the answers to this particular question. This is a very complex question. We don't know exactly all the molecules that are involved and at which time and which ones that allow this one single cell to divide and divide and divide, and then to create a ball of cells that eventually some cells will differentiate to form a central nervous system or a muscular system or a digestive system to form a multicellular organism. So we're working on it. We're just not quite there yet. We haven't teased out all the mysteries of development yet. Other scientists, other biologists, don't necessarily want to work with a whole organism. They might want to ask a more specific question about a particular organ. So, for example, how does the human mind work? Being a neuroscientist, this is something that I'm particularly interested in. You know, how does this mass of cells allow us to do things like talk and drive a car and do calculus and emote? And again, we haven't figured out all of the answers to the many other questions that are underlying this basic one, how does the human mind work? And then on a very different note, you know, some scientists don't want to work with just one organ or just one organism. Ecologists, for example, want to understand, well, how do living things interact in communities? How do they interact with other living things? How do they interact with their physical environment as well? And so ecology would study this particular type of question. And again, this list is not exhaustive. There are an endless supply of biological questions that are being asked on a daily basis that scientists are trying to find the answers to. Now, when you take this course, when you sign up for this course, many students think, okay, so I signed up for biology. I know I'm going to be studying living things and I'm going to have to memorize a whole textbook full of facts. I really hope that you try to step away from that kind of thinking, and that, yes, you will be learning new vocabulary. Yes, you'll have to memorize, what phosphorylation is. But if you start to look for and find and make connections between, different chemical pathways or different organelles within a cell, or, eventually different organ systems within an organism, and you see how the different parts of a larger whole are interconnected and how they work together, it'll make the study of biology that much more interesting and that much easier to understand, to learn, to remember as well. Now, to make it a little bit easier for us, your textbook authors have taken this broad field of biology and divided it up into 5 underlying themes. And this is just something that they came up with as your textbook authors. So we're going to take the rest of the slides, the rest of the lecture topics in chapter 1, and cover them sort of in these 5 themes of organization, information, energy, matter, interactions, and evolution. Now, here's my little disclaimer, though. These themes are just something that your textbook authors came up with. I'm not going to ask you about them. It's just a way to organize the ideas that are coming in the rest of this chapter. What is important, what I do want you to know, are the properties of life, which are in this next slide. So on your syllabus quiz, I ask you, what is your definition of life? Right? The thing that we are studying here in biology. And hopefully you struggled a little bit and you were thinking, well, how do I define life? This is one of the answers to a quiz question that I like reading the best throughout the whole entire semester, because the way that you answer the question really gives me a little bit insight of what kind of person you are. Some students like to think, well, what does Dr. Bowen want me to answer? Some of you dive into your textbooks already. Others will take a very personal approach, or a religious approach, or philosophical approach, or, there's multiple ways to answer that question. So it gives me a little bit of an insight on you as a person. But just like you struggled with the answer to that question, so do scientists. It's not easy to define life using a single word, a single sentence even. So really you have to think about it that life is defined by those things that all living things do. And so on this slide, we introduce to you the properties of life. And so this is a list of properties that I do want you to know, and I will ask you about throughout the semester. So let's talk about them. So first of all, we've got order, right? We've got this beautiful sunflower, and you can see how organized the center of that sunflower is. Not only is it beautiful, but it's also functional, right? Think about the organ systems in your body. You don't have organs just thrown in there, fingers crossed that they function properly, right? They're put in a specific place in a specific order so that they can function at their best capacity. So order is clearly very important for living organisms. Number two, we've got evolutionary adaptation. So you can see this little seahorse here, and it has wrapped its tail around a stem of coral. And you'll notice that the seahorse and the coral look nearly identical. So over time, the seahorse has learned to adapt to its environment and to sort of match its outward appearance so that it looks kind of like coral and maybe isn't as appealing to certain predators, right? And so this is a great example of evolutionary adaptation. Over a long period of time, species have evolved to adapt to their environment so that they can survive under those conditions. All right, next we get to the 3 R's. So we've got regulation, reproduction, and response to the environment. Let's talk about regulation first. So for regulation, this is the body's ability to maintain a natural body environment. So you want to maintain a certain temperature. You want to maintain a certain pH to your body fluids. This jackrabbit, for example, the way that this picture has been taken, you'll notice that the ears are backlit so that you can see the blood vessels in the ears. This is a way that the jackrabbit has the ability to regulate its body temperature. So it likely does not sweat, so it can't cool itself off that way. But under really warm environments, it can send all the blood to its blood vessels in its ears that are really close to the surface of the skin, and heat can dissipate that way from the rabbit's body. Again, helping the rabbit to maintain that normal body temperature under those really warm conditions. I do the same thing. So when I exercise, I don't sweat a lot, TMI, I know, but what happens to me is all of the blood vessels in the surface of my skin, particularly on my face, they get to that surface, and this way I can lose some of that heat that my body is creating as I'm working out, and it also makes me turn bright red. And I don't mean like a nice flush, but people ask me, "Are you okay?" Because it looks like I'm about to keel over and die. So I'm kind of the same way. That's my body's way of regulating my homeostasis. All right, second R, we've got reproduction. This is probably the one that's kind of the duh, right? When you think of things that living things can do, obviously they can reproduce more of their own kind. Non-living things cannot do that. And then the last R, response to the environment, can sometimes be confused with regulation, and they do sometimes go hand in hand. But response to the environment means that the organism can interact with its environment and change based on what it senses from that environment, just like this Venus flytrap has caught a dragonfly, has closed on it, and now it can digest it for an extra source of nutrition. Or if you think about it, if you're sitting in a Collin classroom in the summertime and the AC goes off, what's going to happen to you? Well, the first thing that's going to happen probably is you're going to start to sweat, right? This is your body's way of responding to the environment, and then also technically regulating your environment, your internal environment. So in this case, you sweat, that decreases your internal body temperature, and you wouldn't have started to sweat if your environment hadn't changed, if the AC hadn't gone out. So we have the ability to respond to the environment. Then our second to last property of life is growth and development. Every single one of us has started out as a single cell. So you have your egg, gets fertilized by the sperm, creates a fertilized egg called a zygote. And from there, that cell divides into 2 and 4 and 8 and so on. And eventually, some cells start to differentiate and build what is now your adult body that's made out of trillions of cells. So all of us, even single-celled organisms, go through a process of growth and certain amount of development. And then lastly, energy processing. So living organisms wouldn't be able to do any of these things. Couldn't put things in order, couldn't evolutionarily adapt, couldn't regulate, reproduce, respond to the environment, or especially grow and develop without the ability to take energy in and convert it into usable forms that can be applied to do all these things that living things do.